A decade of lies, a moment of truth. Sophia had spent the last 10 years of her life building what she thought was a perfect home. The love she had for her husband, Daniel, was unconditional. Together, they raised 2 children, worked through financial struggles, and laughed through joyful memories. From the outside, their marriage seemed like a dream. But deep inside, Sophia had always felt an uneasiness, a nagging voice she often pushed away. After all, she trusted Daniel. Daniel was charming, kind, and supportive, but lately something had changed. He became more distant, his late nights at work more frequent, and the warmth in his smile less genuine. Sophia noticed, but convinced herself it was just the stress of work. She didn't want to confront her fear because the truth was too terrifying to bear. One evening, as Sophia prepared dinner, she accidentally knocked Daniel's phone off the counter. The screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. Her heart raced, and for a moment she hesitated. But curiosity, driven by years of quiet suspicion, got the better of her. She unlocked the phone, and there it was, a series of messages between Daniel and another woman, a woman he had been seeing for 10 years. Sophia's world shattered in that instant. A decade of lies had unraveled before her eyes. The pain was unbearable, like a knife twisted into her soul. The man she had trusted, the father of her children, had been living a double life. For years she had been deceived while he carried on his betrayal. Sophia felt lost, humiliated, and heartbroken. But she knew she couldn't let him know that she had found out. Not yet. She needed time to process, to plan. Days passed, and Daniel carried on as if nothing had changed. But Sophia had changed. She began gathering evidence of his affair, every message, every call log, every detail of the life he had been hiding from her. It took all her strength not to confront him right away. But Sophia was not the same naive woman she had been. This time, she would not simply be a victim. She had a plan. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Daniel suggested a celebration, as if he were still the loving husband she had always believed him to be. He smiled at her, the same smile that now felt like poison. She agreed, pretending to be the doting wife, but she had something else in mind. That evening, Sophia dressed in her finest clothes and put on a brave face, even though her heart was in pieces. She invited their closest friends and family to the party. Daniel was surprised, but went along with it, believing everything was still under his control. As the night wore on, Sophia stood up to make a toast. Daniel watched her with pride, completely unaware of what was coming next. "To my husband, Daniel," she began, raising her glass. "For 10 years I have loved you with all my heart. I have believed in you, trusted you, and stood by your side through everything. But tonight, I want to celebrate something else. Truth." The room fell silent, and Daniel's smile faltered. "For 10 years, I have believed in a marriage that was based on love, but little did I know it was built on lies," Sophia continued, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Tonight, I want everyone to know the truth about the man I thought I knew, the man who has been living a double life for 10 years." Gasps echoed through the room, and Daniel's face turned pale. He tried to speak, but the weight of his guilt silenced him. "You thought I didn't know, Daniel," she said, turning to face him. "But I did. I knew for a long time. And while you were betraying me, I was preparing for this moment." With that, Sophia pulled out the evidence of his affair, the messages, the photos, the proof of his decade-long betrayal. She handed it to him, watching as his facade crumbled before her eyes. The guests were shocked, but Sophia felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, she was free. Free from the lies, free from the pain, and free from the man who had broken her heart. Daniel tried to apologize, but his words fell flat. There was nothing he could say that would undo the damage he had caused. "You can leave now," Sophia said calmly. "This marriage is over." As Daniel walked out of their home, defeated and ashamed, Sophia felt a strange mix of emotions. She had loved him once, deeply and truly, but now she knew that the love she had held onto for so long had been built on nothing but illusions. In the months that followed, Sophia rebuilt her life. It wasn't easy, but she had her children and her strength to guide her. She found peace in knowing that she had taken control of her life, and that Daniel's betrayal no longer defined her. Daniel, on the other hand, had lost everything: his wife, his family, and his reputation. He realized too late that the one woman who had truly loved him was gone, and there was no way to get her back. Sophia never looked back. She moved forward, knowing that she deserved better than a life built on lies. In the end, it wasn't Daniel's betrayal that defined her, but her courage to stand up and reclaim her life. The months following Daniel's departure were filled with silence. For the first time in years, the house felt still, almost foreign. Sophia found herself wandering from room to room like a ghost of her former self, piecing together a life that had been ripped apart. Her children, sensing the change, were confused but resilient, their innocent questions cutting deeper than any wound. "Where's Daddy?" her youngest would ask, his wide eyes full of innocence. Sophia would hold him close, her heart breaking every time she whispered, "He's gone for a while, sweetheart." She wanted to protect them from the harshness of the truth, even though they'd inevitably feel the effects of their father's betrayal. Daniel, on the other hand, was drowning in regret. In the beginning, he thought freedom would feel different. He had imagined life after Sophia as one of excitement, a chance to live without the weight of deception. But instead, he found emptiness. His relationship with the other woman quickly fell apart when she realized that his charm was no longer alluring without the security of his marriage. She left him shortly after Sophia exposed him to the world. Daniel tried to reach out to his children, but Sophia kept her distance. She refused to allow him back into their lives until he proved himself worthy, which only fueled Daniel's desperation. He began sending letters, gifts, and apologies, hoping she might reconsider. But each time she received another attempt at reconciliation, Sophia's resolve hardened. Life for Sophia wasn't easy. As much as she tried to put up a brave front, there were nights when she lay awake, wondering if she'd ever truly heal. She replayed the memories in her mind, every laugh, every kiss, every whispered promise. How could she have been so blind? How could a man she had loved so deeply betray her for a decade without her knowing? One day, while she was organizing paperwork, Sophia stumbled upon something unexpected: an old box tucked away in the back of Daniel's closet. Inside were letters, cards, and photos, not from his affair, but from their early years together. A time when their love was pure, untainted by lies. She sat on the floor, clutching an old picture of the two of them from their honeymoon. In the photo, they were both smiling, carefree, lost in the bliss of new love. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized that, at some point, Daniel had truly loved her. But what changed? When did the man in this photo become a stranger? As Sophia sifted through the box, something else caught her eye: a key. She didn't recognize it, and there was no note attached to explain its purpose. Curiosity piqued. She slipped the key into her pocket, determined to figure out what it opened. Over the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about the key. Was it connected to Daniel's affair? Was there more to the story than she had uncovered? Her mind raced with possibilities, each more troubling than the last. Finally, unable to bear the suspense, she decided to confront Daniel directly. She arranged to meet him at a nearby cafe, a neutral ground where she could ask him questions without being overwhelmed by emotions. When she arrived, Daniel was already there, looking more disheveled than she'd ever seen him. His eyes were hollow, his once confident demeanor now replaced by shame. "Sophia," he began, but she cut him off. "I didn't come here to listen to apologies," she said, pulling the key from her pocket and placing it on the table. What does this open? Daniel stared at the key, his face paling. For a moment he seemed at a loss for words, and Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. I never wanted you to find that, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Why? What's it for, Daniel? After everything you've put me through, I deserve the truth. He took a deep breath and looked her in the eyes, the weight of his guilt heavy on his shoulders. It opens a safety deposit box, he admitted. There are things in there, things I didn't want you to know. Sophia's mind raced. What could possibly be in that box? More evidence of his betrayal? Money hidden away for his affair? She couldn't wait any longer. I want to see it, she said firmly. Now. Daniel hesitated but eventually agreed. Together, they drove to the bank in silence, the tension between them palpable. When they arrived, Daniel led her to the vault, his hands shaking as he inserted the key into the lock. With a click, the box opened, and inside were papers, a journal, and a small velvet pouch. Sophia reached for the journal first, flipping through its pages. As she read, her heart sank. It wasn't filled with love letters to another woman, but with confessions. Daniel's confessions of his guilt, his self-loathing, his torment over the affair that had consumed him for years. He wrote about how he hated himself for what he had done, how he had tried to end it multiple times but was too weak to face the truth. I never wanted to hurt you, Daniel said quietly, watching as she read. But I didn't know how to stop. I was too deep in the lie, too afraid to lose you. Tears streamed down Sophia's face as she read his words. It was clear that Daniel had been living in his own private hell, trapped in a web of deceit he couldn't escape. But that didn't absolve him of his actions. What's in the pouch? She asked, her voice barely audible. Daniel hesitated before handing it to her. Sophia opened the pouch, and inside was a ring, her engagement ring, the one she had thought she lost years ago. I was going to propose again, he admitted, his voice breaking. I was planning to end the affair and start over. I thought if I could just make things right. Sophia stared at the ring, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, sorrow, and confusion. Part of her wanted to believe him, to forgive him and move forward. But the scars of his betrayal were too deep. I can't, she whispered, closing the box and turning away. I can't do this, Daniel. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away, her heart heavy with the weight of what could have been. As Sophia walked out of the bank, she realized that this chapter of her life was truly over. No amount of confessions or apologies could undo the damage that had been done. Daniel's lies had destroyed their marriage, and there was no going back. But as painful as it was, Sophia knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she would rebuild her life piece by piece without the shadow of Daniel's betrayal hanging over her. And as she stepped into the sunlight, she felt a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. Sophia walked out of the bank, clutching the small velvet pouch in her hand, her heart weighed down with a sadness that seemed too vast to bear. The cold air bit at her skin as she stepped into the fading afternoon light, but she barely felt it. Everything around her felt muted, distant, as though the world itself had recoiled from the pain she was feeling. She had thought confronting Daniel, learning the truth, would bring her some form of closure, but instead it left her even more broken. That night, Sophia sat alone in their now empty living room, staring blankly at the engagement ring that once symbolized hope and love. She had slipped it onto her finger absent-mindedly, though the gesture now felt hollow. Once it had been a promise of forever. Now it was a cruel reminder of a love that had crumbled under the weight of deception. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt like a tomb. Every corner of it held memories of Daniel, memories that had been tainted by his betrayal. She could almost hear his voice, the echoes of their shared life playing out in her mind. The smell of his cologne still lingered in the bedroom, a reminder that he had been there, that he had once been hers. But now he was gone, and the future they had planned together was nothing more than ashes. The days turned into weeks, and though Daniel tried to reach out, Sophia remained steadfast in her decision. She couldn't go back, not after everything that had happened. The weight of 10 years of lies was too much to bear. She had given him her heart, her trust, and he had shattered it piece by piece. How could she ever trust him again? As Christmas approached, Sophia dreaded the holiday season. It had always been a time of joy for their family, a time to gather around the tree with their children, exchanging gifts and stories by the fire. But this year, there would be no tree, no laughter, no warmth, just the cold, stark reality of a broken family. One evening, as she was putting the children to bed, her youngest son, Oliver, tugged at her sleeve, his big brown eyes full of confusion. "Mommy, will Daddy be here for Christmas?" he asked, his voice soft and innocent. Sophia's heart clenched in her chest. How could she explain to a child the complexities of betrayal, of loss? How could she tell him that his father wasn't the man he thought he was? "I don't know, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "Daddy might not be with us this Christmas." "But why, Mommy?" Oliver persisted, his little face scrunched in confusion. "Did we do something wrong?" Tears welled up in Sophia's eyes as she hugged him tightly, her heart breaking all over again. "No, honey, you didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes mean we can't be together anymore." "But I miss him," Oliver said, his voice barely audible. "I know, baby. I miss him too." One night, as she sat alone in the living room, the silence of the house pressing in on her, Sophia received a message from Daniel. It wasn't the first time he had tried to reach out, but something about this one felt different. His words were filled with regret, with desperation. "Sophia, I know I've hurt you in ways I can never undo. I've lost everything, and I realize now just how much I took for granted. The kids, you. You were my world, and I destroyed it. Please, just let me see them for Christmas. Let me try to make things right, even if it's just for a day. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but they deserve to know that I still love them." Sophia stared at the message, her heart aching. She had kept Daniel at a distance for weeks, but her children still loved their father, despite everything. They didn't understand the full extent of his betrayal, and she wasn't sure if they ever should. They deserved some semblance of happiness, some chance at a normal Christmas. With a deep sigh, she typed out a reply. "You can see them for Christmas, but this doesn't change anything, Daniel. Our marriage is over." Daniel's response came almost immediately. "Thank you, Sophia. I'll be there. I promise I'll make it right." But as the days passed and Christmas approached, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over her. She knew that letting Daniel back into their lives, even for a day, was a risk. What if it gave him false hope? What if it confused the children even more? On Christmas Eve, Daniel arrived at the house. He looked different, thinner, more disheveled, as though the weight of his guilt had physically manifested itself. The children were overjoyed to see him, running into his arms with cries of "Daddy!" That made Sophia's heart ache. For a brief moment, it felt like old times. They sat around the tree, the children tearing open their presents, their laughter filling the room. But Sophia couldn't shake the sadness that clung to her. She watched Daniel as he interacted with the kids, and for the first time, she saw not just the man who had betrayed her, but the father who had also failed them. As the evening wore on, Daniel pulled her aside, his voice low and filled with remorse. "Sophia, I know I've lost you, but I just want to say that I'm sorry for everything. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you and the kids." Sophia looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if you can, Daniel. You broke us. You broke me. And I don't know if I'll ever be whole again." Daniel nodded, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I understand. I just hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me." As he left that night, Sophia stood at the window, watching him walk away into the cold night. The children were asleep upstairs, their innocence still intact, but her heart felt heavier than ever. She had given him the chance to say goodbye to his children, but there was no going back for them. Their family was broken, and no amount of apologies could ever change that. As Daniel walked away into the cold night, Sophia stood frozen by the window, watching his silhouette fade into the distance. The snow fell softly around him, creating an almost peaceful, serene atmosphere, yet inside her, a storm raged on. Her heart ached from the years of betrayal, but there was something else there too, an overwhelming wave of conflicting emotions. Even after all the pain, she couldn't deny that a part of her still loved him, or at least the man he once was. She wrapped her arms around herself and moved from the window, retreating to the living room where the soft glow of Christmas lights flickered. The house was quiet now, the children fast asleep, and she found herself longing for the comfort of their laughter to drown out the noise in her mind. As she sat on the couch, her thoughts wandered back to when they first met. The early years of their relationship had been filled with love, passion, and hope. They had been so young, so certain that nothing could tear them apart. And yet, life had proven otherwise. Somewhere along the way, Daniel had lost his way, and so had their marriage. But tonight, as she watched him with their children, she saw glimpses of the man she had fallen in love with. There was still tenderness in the way he held their son, the way he spoke to their daughter. It was the same warmth that had drawn her to him all those years ago. But was that enough? Could the fragments of the past be pieced together to build something new? The following morning, Sophia awoke to the sound of soft footsteps. She opened her eyes to see her children, still in their pajamas, sitting beside her bed with wide eyes and innocent smiles. "Mommy, it's Christmas!" they said in unison, their excitement palpable. Sophia smiled, though her heart was heavy. She sat up and hugged them both tightly, feeling their warmth surround her. "Merry Christmas, my loves," she whispered. After breakfast, the children eagerly asked when they could see their father again. Sophia hesitated for a moment, then gently explained that he might not be able to come back today. She saw the disappointment in their eyes, but they didn't protest. They had already learned too much about disappointment this year. A knock on the door broke her reverie. Her heart skipped a beat as she walked to the door, unsure of who she expected to see. When she opened it, there stood Daniel, snow clinging to his hair and shoulders. He looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen in years, one of vulnerability, of quiet desperation. "Sophia, can I come in?" he asked softly, his voice barely audible above the sound of the wind. She hesitated, but then nodded, stepping aside to let him in. He brushed the snow off his coat and stood in the entryway, looking around the house as if seeing it for the first time. It was the same home they had built together, yet it felt so different now. "I know I don't deserve to be here," Daniel began, his eyes downcast. "But I couldn't stop thinking about last night, about the kids, about you. I know I've made mistakes, more than I can ever make up for, but I can't stop hoping that maybe, somehow, we can find a way back to each other." Sophia felt a lump form in her throat as she listened to his words. She had dreamed of hearing him say something like this for so long, but now that the moment had come, she didn't know how to feel. Could she trust him again? Could they rebuild what had been broken? "I don't know if we can, Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You hurt me. You hurt us. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you for that." Daniel took a step closer, his eyes pleading with her. "I know I've lost your trust, Sophia, and I know it will take time, maybe a lifetime, to earn it back. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this, if you'll let me." Tears welled up in Sophia's eyes as she looked at him, torn between the love she still felt and the pain that lingered in her heart. For so long she had carried the weight of his betrayal, and now, for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they could find their way back to each other. Maybe not to the same love they had before, but to something new, something stronger. "I don't know if I can ever forget what happened," she said softly, wiping away a tear. "But for the sake of our children, and for the sake of what we once had, I'm willing to try." Daniel's face softened, and he took her hands in his, holding them gently. "I'll never take you for granted again, Sophia, I promise." They stood there in the quiet of the house, the warmth of their connection slowly returning, as if the cracks in their relationship were being mended, one moment at a time. For the first time in a long time, they allowed themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, love could heal even the deepest wounds. As the night wore on, they sat together by the fire talking about their children, their future, and the mistakes of the past. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. And as the first light of Christmas morning began to creep through the window, they both realized that this was the greatest gift they could have given each other, a second chance. The children woke up to find their parents sitting together, smiling. It was a Christmas miracle, not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time in a long time, there was hope. And as Sophia leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. For the first time in years, their love felt real again. Fragile, yes, but also resilient. The road ahead would be difficult, but they had already survived so much. And now, with the promise of a new beginning, they knew they could survive anything, because love, even when broken, had the power to heal. As the warmth of that Christmas morning faded into memory, life began to return to its routine for Daniel and Sophia. They had promised each other to rebuild their relationship, but as the days turned into weeks, they found that healing wasn't as simple as they had hoped. The trust that had been shattered by Daniel's years of infidelity didn't simply return with a few heartfelt apologies. And while they shared moments of hope and even happiness, the underlying tension between them started to creep back into their lives. Sophia, despite her efforts to move forward, couldn't shake the lingering doubts that gnawed at her heart. Every time Daniel left the house for work or met with friends, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered, "What if he's still hiding something?" She tried not to listen to that voice, but the weight of it grew heavier each day. It wasn't long before those doubts began to manifest in subtle ways. Sophia found herself questioning Daniel more frequently, asking about his whereabouts and his activities. At first, Daniel was patient, understanding that his past actions had caused this mistrust. But as time went on, the constant questioning wore him down. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, they sat at the dinner table in silence. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension. Daniel stared at his plate, pushing food around with his fork, while Sophia sipped her wine, her eyes distant. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this, Sophia," Daniel finally said, his voice tired. "It feels like no matter what I do, you'll never trust me again." Sophia put down her glass and looked at him, her eyes filled with frustration. "Can you blame me, Daniel? After everything that happened, after all the lies, how am I supposed to just forget all of that?" "I'm not asking you to forget," Daniel replied, his tone growing defensive. "But I'm doing everything I can to show you that I've changed. I've been home every night. I'm here with you and the kids. I'm trying." "Trying isn't enough," Sophia interrupted, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I can ever trust you the way I used to." The words hung in the air, cutting deep. Daniel looked away, his jaw tight. "Then what's the point of all this?" he asked quietly. "If you can't trust me, how are we ever going to move forward?" Sophia didn't have an answer. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe that their love was strong enough to overcome the past. But every time she thought they were making progress, the fear crept back in. Days turned into months, and the cracks in their relationship deepened. Arguments became more frequent, small disagreements escalating into full-blown fights. The children, sensing the growing tension, became quieter, their laughter less frequent. Sophia's heart ached every time she saw the sadness in their eyes, but she didn't know how to fix it. Then came the financial strain. Daniel's business, which had once been successful, began to falter. The economy had taken a downturn, and contracts that had been stable for years were suddenly pulled out from under him. Sophia had always relied on Daniel's income to support their comfortable lifestyle, and now, with money growing tight, the stress mounted. They argued over bills, over the children's school fees, over every little expense. Daniel began to work longer hours, desperate to save the business, but that only added to Sophia's growing sense of isolation. She felt like she was losing him all over again, this time to work instead of infidelity. One night, after another exhausting argument about finances, Daniel left the house in a huff, slamming the door behind him. Sophia sat at the kitchen table, tears streaming down her face. She didn't even know why they were fighting anymore. It seemed like everything was falling apart, despite their best efforts to hold it together. As the months dragged on, the weight of their problems grew unbearable. Sophia found herself sinking into a deep sadness, one that she couldn't shake no matter how hard she tried. She felt alone even when Daniel was beside her. The love they had once shared seemed like a distant memory, something fragile and broken beyond repair. Then came the moment that would test them in a way they hadn't anticipated. One morning, Sophia woke up feeling nauseous. At first, she thought it was just the stress catching up with her, but when the nausea persisted for several days, she went to see her doctor. After running a few tests, the doctor sat her down, a concerned look on his face. "I'm afraid it's not just stress, Sophia," he said gently. "You're pregnant." Sophia stared at him in disbelief. Pregnant? How could this be happening now, in the midst of all their struggles? A baby was the last thing they needed. When she told Daniel that evening, his reaction was one of stunned silence. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hands gripping his knees, his face pale. "I don't know if we can do this," he whispered, his voice shaking. "We're barely holding it together as it is." Sophia nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She had felt the same way. A baby should have been a source of joy, but all she could feel was fear. Fear that this would push them even further apart, that they would never be able to find their way back to each other. The following weeks were filled with uncertainty and tension. Sophia considered the possibility of raising the child on her own, wondering if it would be better to separate from Daniel rather than bring a baby into such a fractured home. Daniel, on the other hand, threw himself even more into his work, avoiding the difficult conversations that needed to happen. Their relationship was hanging by a thread, and both of them knew it. One night, after a particularly brutal argument, Sophia packed a bag. She didn't know where she was going, but she needed to get away, to clear her head, to think about what she really wanted for herself and for the baby. As she stood at the front door, her hand on the handle, Daniel appeared behind her, his voice soft. "Don't go," he pleaded. "Please, don't leave." Sophia turned to face him, her eyes filled with pain. "I don't know how to stay," she whispered. "I don't know how to keep doing this." For a long moment, they just stood there, the silence between them heavy with all the things they hadn't said. Then, slowly, Daniel reached out and took her hand. "I don't want to lose you, Sophia," he said, his voice breaking. "I know I've made so many mistakes, but I love you. I've always loved you." Sophia looked into his eyes, searching for the truth in his words. For the first time in months, she saw the vulnerability in him, the same vulnerability that had drawn her to him all those years ago. And in that moment, something shifted. "I love you too," she said quietly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "But love isn't enough, Daniel. We have to fight for this. We have to fight for us." And so, with the weight of their past mistakes still looming over them, they made a pact. They would fight, together, for their love, for their children, and for the baby that was on the way. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and heartache, but for the first time in a long time, they both believed that they could make it through. Because sometimes, love isn't about perfection. It's about perseverance. And despite everything, they were willing to fight for that second chance. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions for Sophia and Daniel. The house was quieter than usual, filled with the kind of silence that echoed between them, like a wall neither could climb over. They had agreed to try, but both knew the weight of their past mistakes loomed too large to simply disappear overnight. Sophia often found herself sitting by the window, cradling her growing belly, lost in thought. She had longed for a moment like this, being pregnant, building a family, and sharing it all with someone she loved deeply. But the joy she had once imagined didn't come so easily. Instead, she felt the sting of uncertainty and fear. Could they truly rebuild everything that had been broken? Could love really conquer the mess of pain, betrayal, and mistrust? Daniel, on the other hand, seemed lost in his own world of regret. He was working late into the night more often, trying to fix his business, which had taken a significant downturn. But it was also an escape, a way to avoid the difficult conversations, to keep from facing the very real problems in their marriage. Every time he looked at Sophia, the guilt washed over him, knowing he had almost thrown everything away. One evening, after days of tiptoeing around each other, Daniel came home to find Sophia in the kitchen preparing dinner. The scent of roasted chicken filled the air, a comforting aroma that reminded him of better times. He paused in the doorway, watching her as she moved around the room, her hands gently resting on her belly from time to time. It was a simple domestic scene, but it hit him with a wave of emotion. For so long he had taken these moments for granted. The quiet dinners, the small gestures, the love that had once been so effortless between them. He realized, standing there, how much he had missed, and how much he had almost lost. He cleared his throat, stepping into the room. "Sophia," he said softly, his voice hesitant, "can we talk?" She looked up, startled by the gentleness in his tone. For a moment she didn't respond, just nodded and wiped her hands on a towel before sitting down at the kitchen table. Daniel joined her, his heart racing in his chest. He wasn't sure where to begin. How do you even start to apologize for years of betrayal? How do you ask for forgiveness when you know you don't deserve it? "I've been thinking," he began slowly, searching for the right words. "About everything. About us." Sophia didn't say anything, but the slight nod of her head told him to keep going. "I know I've hurt you in ways that I can't even begin to understand," he continued, his voice trembling with emotion. "I was selfish. I let my pride, my ego, and my mistakes come between us, and I didn't realize how much I was destroying. I didn't see what I had right in front of me." Tears filled Sophia's eyes, but she remained silent, her gaze fixed on the table. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to make it right," Daniel went on, his own voice thick with emotion. "But I want to try. I need you to know that I love you, Sophia. I've always loved you, and I'm so sorry that I made you doubt that." Sophia finally looked up, her tear-filled eyes meeting his. "It's not that simple, Daniel," she whispered. "Love isn't enough. It's not just about saying you're sorry. We can't erase what happened." "I know," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I know we can't go back, but we can move forward. We can rebuild. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us." For a long moment they sat in silence, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Sophia felt the familiar ache in her chest, the mixture of love and pain that had been her constant companion for so long. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him again. But the scars ran deep. "I'm scared, Daniel," she admitted quietly. "I'm scared that we'll keep hurting each other. I don't know if I can go through that again." Daniel squeezed her hand gently, his eyes full of sincerity. "I'm scared too," he confessed, "but I'm willing to fight for us, for our family, for this baby." Sophia's gaze softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she saw a glimmer of the man she had fallen in love with. The man who had made her laugh, who had held her when she cried, who had promised to love her forever. Maybe they had lost their way, but maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. Over the next few weeks, things began to shift between them. It wasn't easy. There were still arguments, moments of doubt, and lingering pain. But they were trying. Daniel started coming home earlier, spending more time with Sophia and the children. They took long walks together, talked late into the night, and slowly, the walls between them began to crumble. One night, as they lay in bed together, Sophia resting her head on Daniel's chest, she whispered, "I never thought we'd make it here." Daniel pressed a kiss to the top of her head, his arms wrapped around her protectively. "Neither did I," he admitted softly, "but I'm so glad we did." As the months passed, they continued to heal, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. When their baby girl was born, it felt like the start of a new chapter, a chance to rewrite their story with love, forgiveness, and hope. But just as they were beginning to feel secure in their newfound happiness, a new challenge emerged. Sophia's parents, who had never approved of Daniel, began to interfere. They had been quietly watching from the sidelines, and now, seeing their daughter's happiness, they saw an opportunity to break their family apart. Her mother, under the guise of concern, started planting seeds of doubt in Sophia's mind. "Are you sure you can trust him again?" she would ask. "What if he goes back to his old ways?" Her father, more direct, told Daniel outright that he wasn't good enough for his daughter. "You've already broken her heart once," he said coldly. "You'll do it again." Sophia found herself caught between her love for Daniel and the pressure from her parents. The old fears resurfaced, and she began to question everything again. Could they really make it, or was she setting herself up for more heartbreak? Daniel sensed the shift in Sophia and knew he had to act. One night, after a tense family dinner where her parents' disapproval was palpable, Daniel took Sophia's hand and led her outside. Under the stars, with the cool night air surrounding them, he looked into her eyes and said, "I know this isn't easy. I know your parents don't believe in us, but I do. I believe in us, and I'm not going to let anyone, not even them, tear us apart." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes as she realized the depth of Daniel's commitment. Despite everything they had been through, he was still standing by her side, still willing to fight for their love. "I believe in us too," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I always have." And in that moment, Sophia made a decision. She wouldn't let her parents' doubts dictate her future. She had chosen Daniel, and despite their rocky past, she knew in her heart that their love was worth fighting for. Together, they walked back into the house hand in hand, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Because this time, they would face them together.